Hari Om, everyone. Welcome. We'll start chanting the prayer as the invocation at the beginning. Tim, if we could just let the newcomers have the prayer for next week, but we'll just chant it now. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Punattu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavati Tamastu Mavitvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we're on the new chapter, chapter 18, the final chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, entitled The Yoga of Liberation Through Renunciation. It's a very practical chapter, as mentioned last week, from verse 6 onwards. It talks about the constituents of the inner personality. But right now, from verses 1 to 6, we're talking about who is gaining an understanding of who is that spiritual aspirant. What is a spiritual aspirant about? What do they do? How can we conceive it in our practical everyday lives? So the word, we can perhaps envisage liberation as some freedom. Perhaps we don't know what it means, but we'll go along and unravel that. But this word renunciation is always perhaps baffling or sounds quite terrifying, to want for better. It almost sounds as though you have to give up everything, but it's quite the contrary. And if anybody was in last week's class, what do we, in a quick one word, what could we surmise that this word renunciation means? Anyone? Vidya.
Take up.
Take up. That's 2 words. Okay. Take up. Isha.
Grace.
Growth. So we always feel that this word renunciation means giving up, but if we just shift the focus and think about it as growth, taking up. If you examine your thoughts, your mind, the things that you do in your everyday life, you are never going to give up anything unless you have something better to do or go to. So when you pitch up something bigger, higher, better for you, as far as you're concerned, the value which you are no longer interested in slowly falls away, wanes away, in anything. So when you've got something higher to strive for, a bigger value, it may be bigger for one person and not for another. But in your view, when you place your value on something bigger, as far as you're concerned, that lower falls away. If you can just remember that, you pitch up something bigger, the lower falls away. That is growth, the definition of renunciation. If we can actually understand that, you just leave the class now. You've got it in a nutshell. Just keep doing that. It's a little bit more complicated than that. That's why we've got 78 verses. It's not more complicated than that concept, but the understanding is more complex, because we get so caught up with all the belief systems of what we think it might be. So it's not what you do in life that matters, but how you do it. So in Vedanta, when we question this word renunciation in the Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta, same thing, the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of the truth, the knowledge which takes you to that terminus of your existence, the reason why you're here, everything you pursue is to get to that truth. Consciously or unconsciously, we're doing it. Whether we do it in the world or whether we work on ourselves, we're all wanting to get to something which is permanent truth, which liberates you. So this word renunciation is a method on how you can actually do this. And the questions that one might want to be asking to clear your doubts. First of all, it's often thought that in terms of this idea of renunciation or a spiritual aspirant, that you need to go away from the world. But it's a sad state of affairs. What you need to seclude yourself from something, from your world. It doesn't make sense. If you seclude yourself from something, your mind's still functioning. And if you abstain from something, that craving just gets bigger. So you can't just remove yourself from something. So renunciation can't mean that. So it can't mean that you don't have any contact with your world. Some people say, I shouldn't do this or I shouldn't do that. That's good, that's bad. It doesn't mean that. It's different for different people, what's good and what's bad. Does it mean abstaining from enjoyment? So if you can contact your world, does it mean that you should abstain from certain enjoyments and beings? Is there any restriction? You can't even say that, because what's a certain amount of okay for one person is not okay for another. How can you make a rigid restriction of what's good, what's bad for one and another? And besides, if you're in the world, should you not enjoy it? It'd be a sad state to be in this world and you don't enjoy it. It's quite frustrating if you don't enjoy it. And if a spiritual evolution means that you don't enjoy, it's pretty, I don't think I would want to take it up. So it can't mean that. Often in spiritual balances, it's sort of, there's different classes of people. And some say you shouldn't indulge and you should withdraw from the sense contacts and not enjoy them. So it means that one leads a frustrated life because we're contacting the world all of the time. It's just sad and frustrating if we can't enjoy it. So what does it mean? What does it mean when we have these ideas? You don't have to give up anything. You can enjoy. You can be in the world and have whatever material things you want in accordance to the knowledge and in accordance to experience. So what's the difference between a person who's a materialist, a sensualist, and a renunciate? This is the question one ought to be asking. Is everybody okay so far? So there's no restriction on quantum of enjoyment. There's no restriction of what you contact. You don't have to go away in seclusion. You can be very much in your world. So what's the difference between a materialist, sensualist, if we can understand those, one who's always wanting to be satiated by nice things, senses, one who wants all the material things to satiate them, or a renunciate? Because we're not saying a renunciate doesn't have any of those things. Is it confusing? What it's trying to put forward, this growth, you're taking up the higher value, the lower value falls away. It's actually a mental attitude of your relationship to your world. So when you take up a higher value can't be of self-interest. It's got to be beyond one's own selfish needs. When one does that, one flourishes. You keep pitching up that bigger value till you reach that truth. That's the idea of renunciation. It's removing that copywriting ego, which creates a resistance in you to want I and my, I'm important, it belongs to me, I alone exist, everything should cater to me, and not acknowledging that you live in unison with your world, universe. Giving up that copywriting ego. So it's an inner abstraction of higher values, understanding the ephemeral nature of the world. So if you pitch up on satiating your wants and needs on things which are passing, fleeting, you never get satisfied. But if you pitch up a higher value on something which is a little less impermanent, there's a potential for you to enjoy. Your purview is on a bigger value. There's a bigger perspective of pleasure and enjoyment. So renunciation could be said that it's not a dispossession, but it's an all possession. It's not a disengagement from enjoyment, but it's actually a complete enjoyment, which is getting satiated. Is everybody okay so far? So it's removing that copywriting ego, which allows you to actually enjoy. That's the crux of renunciation. It's a mental attitude. So it's not what you do, but how you do it. It's a mental attitude. It's not what you have, how you have it. You could be a beggar attached to your begging bowl or totally detached from your Ferrari. It really doesn't matter. It's not in the possession, it's in the mental state. Or it could be vice versa. So a higher value means that it can't be focused upon one's own selfish interest. That's what you're dropping in renunciation. That's what's enabling us to enjoy. You've got to try it out. You can see it in nature. In actual fact, when we even have a fruit, we remove the peel to eat the fruit inside. We drop the part which is not for us. We drop the non-essential for the essential. That's all it's trying to tell us. You wouldn't have a chocolate bar and eat the wrapper. You remove the wrapper. It's just trying to get you to understand in life, one has to remove the non-essentials. I'm not giving you huge, complex examples, just very simple. When you're young, you're playing with toys. When you grow up to a teenager, you have no interest in the toys. You've dropped the toys because you have some better interest. You just naturally fall away. And so forth. when you're an adult. There's certain teenage things which drop away when you've pitched up something bigger. If you don't pitch up anything bigger, they stay with you. You've got to put up with it. So this is about improving. This idea of renunciation improves your mental health. You pitch up something bigger, a cause, an ideal, something beyond your own self-interest. The bigger that is, the less your ego plays. The more you play on that bigger value, the more satiated your desires are. But the minute it's catering to yourself, that's where the problem is. You have to put up with the stress and strain and their mental spiral downwards. So we'd Krishna in the first verse, Arjuna in the first verse, had asked if you could tell me, Krishna, the difference between, or if you could tell me what is sannyas, what is tyag. Sannyas meaning renunciation, and tyag meaning relinquishment. What's the difference? So we began last week to explain. So that sannyas is actually an effect of tyag. So sannyasi, a spiritual aspirant who has dropped desire-ridden activities. A tyag has dropped. If they're not able to drop the desire-ridden activity, those activities geared to one's own self-interest, then perhaps one can start by dropping the fruit of your actions. So you pursue your vocation, you pursue whatever it is you've got a craving or desire for. But when it comes to your pursuit, you don't look at the result of what's coming. You don't focus on the fruit, what you're going to get out of it. You focus on just the action. Inevitably, if you put in all the efforts today of whatever you need to do, tomorrow is going to be your success. So you don't need to worry about the result. You just need to put in the efforts to your present actions, and the results will come. But your concern over the future results is what saps your energy, stresses you out. It's quite smart. So really this sannyas and tyaga is just like self-management. And self-management, work management. Work management is just how you relate in your world. So he's asking this question in the first verse. Did we do verse 2 last week? We'd read the...
We just chanted the verse, Paruji. We didn't read it.
Okay. Let's chant the verse.
Shri Bhagavanuvacha Kamyanam karmanam nyasam sannyasam kavayo viduhu sarva karma palatyagam prahustyagam vichakshana.
Brahma, if you could read the verse.
The Blessed Lord said, sages understand sannyasa to be renunciation of desire-ridden action, the relinquishment of fruit of all action, the wise declare as tyaga.
So we've just mentioned that now. We'll just explain it a little bit more before we read the verse. So Kavya, the sage, states, one who's got to that status, there's no arrogation in renunciation to one's personal ego, of desire-ridden activities. So a sannyasi has dropped the desire-ridden activities. So the pursuit of whatever they need to do, that desire, but they've dropped that value which is to their own interest. So they've dropped the desire element of it, that which is propelling them to get that reaction. Their motivation is towards the self. That's how they dropped it. So the focus is on something more universal, that self, to get to the truth. That's what's driving them. Though you might call it a desire, but it surpasses all other desires. It's no longer desire-ridden. It's not, can I get this or can I get that? It's all activities geared towards truth, dedicated to reaching self-realization, freedom, liberation. The mind's focused on that higher ideal. Remember, you pitch up the higher, the lower falls away. But you've got to remember something. You can't have detachment. Detachment doesn't arise unless you had an attachment in the first place. So if you don't have any interest in a particular, if you don't have any interest in, I don't know, smoking or playing tennis, doesn't matter, it could be any desire, then it can't be that you're detaching yourself from smoking because you never had the desire for it. So it's where you have a particular desire and you focus that value on something bigger. You pursue that desire, but all with in the thought of to reach the self, the truth. So you identify with something higher. So that's the growth. So in your pursuit, you begin to enable yourself to be objective in your pursuit because it's focused on something higher. It's not focused on that aggrandizement which consumes you. That's a sannyasi. So that's actually, the sannyasi is in that mode. That's the effect of the pursuit of a tyagi. When you've got many desires and you can't focus them on that truth all the time, whatever you're pursuing, just don't have the interest of the result. That's a tyagi. So that's the practice. Sannyasi is the effect of that practice. Everyone okay? Let's read it. Let's read.
Krishna answers Arjuna's question regarding the distinction between sannyasa and tyaga. The Lord himself observes tradition by quoting the ancient sages in his answer. Their greatness lies in the absence of ego. Krishna quotes the authority of his declaration from the Upanishadic sages in his sermon, and the sages likewise attribute their knowledge to their masters. Thus, the traditional preceptor-disciple lineage, Guru-Shishya Parampara, has been maintained from time immemorial.
Mm-hmm. So there's no arrogation that I know this. It's this knowledge has been there from time immemorial. We don't know where it came from. It's a collection. It's like whatever we have now, it's like whatever we do, we can never take anything for granted, that you can never arrogate it to oneself. In fact, right now we are having this class. There's an acknowledgement that nothing belongs to oneself. We're a part and parcel of an orchestra, everything functioning. You can't arrogate to something and say, I did this, or I gave this. Even right now, the fact that we have the class on a computer, so there's millions and millions of people who have contributed to actually enabling us to have a computer, so we can actually have this class. So we can never say, oh, I'm the only one able to give you. It doesn't work like that. There's no ego involved. In fact, that's the tradition. There's many, many sages and saints collectively have passed down this knowledge. It doesn't belong to any of them. This is the tradition. So there's an absence of I and my ego. This is just knowledge which is of universal principles. It doesn't belong to anybody. You might package it and say it belongs to this religion or this philosophy, but the reality is universal principles don't belong to anybody. They belong to everyone. Those who want to seek them out and use them get the benefit of it. And it's handed down in that manner. So as sannyasi, Rama, you'd like to read it.
Sannyasa means renunciation of desire-ridden action propelled by ego. The ego brings in desire from the past. Desire propels action. Sannyasa is renunciation of egocentric desire by dedicating action to the supreme goal of self-realization. The mind entertains desire for worldly objects. The intellect identifies with a high ideal, directs action towards the chosen ideal. As the intellect attaches itself to the higher, the mind gets detached from the lower.
Mm-hmm. There's something here which in our everyday, we often talk about to have a desire or have an ego, a sense of I and my, is actually not a negative. Sometimes we hear that in the knowledge that we're talking about here. We're always talking about to get rid of that copywriting ego, to not perform desire-ridden activities. But often in our everyday, we often hear you need to have a desire, a drive to do anything, otherwise you won't go anywhere. You got to have that ego to pursue. So what's the difference? What are we talking about? How do we understand that? Anyone? Because this is always talking about, let's get rid of that ego or that desire. So what are we actually to understand? Anyone? Mm-hmm.
Paralji, can you reframe your question again, please?
Sure. So sometimes we hear or maybe you've not heard it, but sometimes you hear that, you've got to have a desire. You've got to have a desire to drive you to succeed. And in actual fact, here we're saying you've got to get rid of this desire to succeed. You've got to have that ego to actually do something. Now here we're saying you've got to get rid of that ego to actually evolve. It seems like a contradiction too. So what is it that we've actually got to think about? They seem like opposites. So in order to succeed or evolve, should we have an ego? Should we not have an ego? According to this, we should remove our ego. But in accordance to what we hear, often we should emphasize our ego or emphasize our desires to succeed. Does it make sense? Is it clear?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I guess in response to that, perhaps based on what it seems, that we should raise or elevate the quality of our desires to something higher, to something that's more permanent and lasting, that's not transient in terms of its effect and enjoyment, and it stretches us and makes us grow. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else?
So it's just placing our thought process as to a particular action in a different way. So the only example that comes to mind is, for example, a home. You can look at it in a different way, so two different ways. So if you go with the focus on the ego for self-gain, you would say, I need a house, I need somewhere where, a beautiful home, so for the world it's perceived as a lovely place, and I'm doing it for the world and for other people. Or you can see it as I need a home, so because I need shelter, I need somewhere to live, so I can further my practice for something higher. I mean, that's probably a silly example, but that's all I can think of right now. So it's just about having a different thought process to the particular action, which is fueled by a desire. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, good. So you're saying you can have a home, or you can have different items that you desire for you or a bigger purpose.
yeah,
Is that what you mean?
exactly, yeah.
Good.
So you're not the I behind the action, you're placing it on something higher. So it's not associated with, right, I'm doing this for Isha because Isha needs to be a certain way. You're just placing that I on a higher truth.
So who gains in the end? Just breaking it down.
Yeah, well, ultimately you're gaining, the individual's gaining, but receiving it in a different way.
So if it's placed on just, the desire is placed on just you or your immediate, it will gain short term until it diminishes, then you have to suffer it. But if it's placed on something bigger, an ideal, a cause, and not on the individual desire per se towards you, then there's a potential that it fuels everybody's enjoyment plus yours. That's the difference. So when we often say you know, you got to have a desire. A desire, if it's directed towards your own self-interest, will quickly diminish. It'll give you a kick, no doubt, but it will diminish. A desire directed to something bigger, more universal, you can picture your community, your country, your nation, universally, that self, has a potential for you to fit nicely into the universe, and also you enjoy, but the universe gains and you enjoy. But it's all enjoyment. It's all fulfillment. Whereas the other one is you do, it diminishes quickly. So the same sorts of words are used in different contexts, and it's just here we're just to be aware. We're not saying that you don't have any desire. It's actually how do you direct that desire, which is really important, which displaces that I and my, which diminishes that truth. Tim.
Earlier on, you used the example of a fruit. You take away the peel to get to the fruit. But then you take away the fruit to get to the seed. And it's the seed that benefits future generations.
And yourself if you plant. Okay, yes. So take away, you picture upon the higher, the lower falls away. You picture upon the essentials of life, the non-essentials fall away. So here, going back to the verse, you detach yourself from the lower. Actually, you attach yourself to the higher, and the lower falls away. You've detached yourself from that lower as a matter of course. Let's read the next.
Detachment can never arise without attachment. Renunciation tantamounts to your identification, attachment to something higher, greater in life, and consequent detachment from its lower aspects. Renunciation is therefore growth in personality, one's spiritual evolution. In that exalted state, a sannyasi functions impersonally, objectively. He merely executes his obligatory action without polluting it with egocentric desire. Thus, his action becomes productive while his mind remains peaceful.
Okay. So when the mind's placed on something higher, it cuts that worry of the past, the anxiety of the future, because it's placed on something higher. So your mind stops its craving. It's just getting on with that action, per se. That's a sannyasi. It's just pursuing that action towards the truth. Mind's focused on something higher. The worry of the past, the anxiety of the future is not there. It's focused on something higher. So you can actually get on with the present action. So it doesn't impede your growth. If you can't do that, drop the fruit of action. If you can't think about that activity which is driving you, that desire, to focus it on something higher. Start with dropping, relinquishing just the fruit of action. Don't think of the result, the future. Just think of what you're doing now. Pitch up your value, whatever extent your ideal, your goal is, then focus your mind back onto the present action. That's a Tyaga. That's keeps you with that peace of mind. So one's focused on the self, then while acting in the present, the other one is not focusing on the fruit of action, because the focus is distracting when you focus on that fruit of action, but it's focused on the present action. In both cases, you've removed the worry and anxiety from past and future. Let's go to the last.
Tyaga means relinquishment of fruit of action. You may act without bringing in the past, desire, yet your mind may crave for the future, result of action. Your craving may only impede the acquisition of fruit. Tyaga is dropping your anxiety for acquisition and enjoyment of fruit while you act. Anxiety for result spoils the quality of action, impairs the result of action. Practice of Tyaga prevents this from happening.
So, if you're worried about, am I going to achieve that? When is this going to happen? Just focus on doing the action. Forget about what the result is. That's Tyaga. Just focus on putting in your efforts. Let's read the last paragraph.
Fruit, be it success or failure, is an effect. Action being the cause that produces the effect. People are more concerned with the effect than the cause. Everyone craves for success, which belongs to the future. Rarely indeed does one concentrate on action in the present. Hardly anyone realizes that today's action, well done itself, is tomorrow's success. Dropping the anxiety for fruit, Tyaga brings about peace of mind as well as success in action.
So even if you're not interested in spiritual evolution, at the material level, if you just focus on doing the action per se, not thinking about the result, that in itself brings your success. Materially speaking. When you see that diminish and you keep chasing, and perhaps the recognition may make you think that there's something more to think on. That's when you begin your spiritual evolution. But in the general mundane everyday, you can pursue it like that. Just drop the fruit of action. It'll bring you your success. Never mind looking at it from a spiritual point of view. See, the concept is the same. Pitch up the higher, the lower falls away. Tim.
Our guest today, Abak, wishes to ask a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
So the question I just kind of forgot it now.
Don't worry, give it a shot.
Oh man, I lost it. Sorry, it's late here. But oh yeah. So I get like the idea of relinquishing the like the goal, the end result. So and I wanted to ask though, it's still uncertain, like that you're going to get the end result. Is that what you're saying as well? Like if you relinquish the like the desire, like how you said we're more focused on the effects and the cause. So we're focused more on like the end result, like
Mm-hmm.
everything's a means to an end. Yeah. So I'm wondering, because if we do focus on the present and our efforts during the present,
Mm-hmm.
still never going to give us the guarantee that that action is going to get, bring us the effect that that initially gave us the motivation to go after that sort of whatever
Got
that
you.
behavior. You
Got
get what
you.
I'm saying?
I get you. Okay.
It's still uncertain.
Okay, it's not uncertain at all.
Is not uncertain at all.
No. Let's look at it this way. It's quite the contrary. I understand what you're saying. So it's almost like you're saying, if you don't focus on a goal, how are you ever going to achieve that goal? Perhaps is your question. Is that right?
If you don't ever focus on a goal, how are you going to ever achieve that goal?
Is that it?
It's like, no, it's not exactly what I was saying. It's
Okay.
just I'm trying to gain like an understanding of the uncertainty involved in like the spiritual practice of like,
Get you.
okay, so I actually have a real life example I'd like to bring in. I play piano
Mm-hmm.
and I make a lot of my own like music and just improvise. And every time I go to the piano, it's like I'm aiming at making something, in like that sounds very fulfilling to the ear, just something that'll really. And so yeah, I appreciate good music. I try to create good music anyway. But if I focus so much on like my fingers and the notes, it never happens. It's like I'm focused on this. I'm so focused, but it's never fruitful. It's
Mm-hmm.
never. So basically, but when I let go and just listen to the music that I'm playing, like I just listening to it and let go of all the notes and just become present and put the effort into the actual sound, more than like the technical things going on, then it's possible, but not certain, it's possible that it generates this sort of like amazing music. But it's very rare. I can never do it like on purpose.
Okay.
Where it's very hard to relinquish control on purpose, at least for me.
Okay. But I think you sort of summed it up of what we're talking about quite
Yeah.
accurate. So let me just elaborate what I think you're saying and how we fit it in to what we're
Okay.
talking about. So in any case of when you pursue anything, in terms of a Tyaga, you have a desire, you have a thought of what you want to pursue, a vocation, perhaps, whatever. In that pursuit, when you sit down, you may have an idea, an aim, an aspiration of where you want to head towards. Something in particular that you want to create, perhaps. So there's an objective, there's a goal there. But if you're focused on that objective, as you were saying, if you're focused on trying to control it,
Yeah.
your mind's always on the goal of how it should be. There's no possibility of actually pursuing the task in hand because the mind is focused ahead of itself and it's not actually doing all the activities which need to lead it up to achieving that goal. Now, you've got some idea, not you personally, we all have some idea of what we want it to look like. But if we get attached to that alone, we don't put in the efforts. But we do have some idea of where we're heading. We've set some sort of goal, aspiration, bigger value, cause, ideal, something in mind we're hooked on. With sufficient information prior to what we want it to be. We've done our homework logically of what we want it to be, especially in the spiritual path. That's why we're doing this sort of thing to figure out what is it we want it to be. We want to be free. So what does that look like? So if we bring it back, having set the value, bring it back to the present action, that present effort, even though we don't know what that end goal is exactly, we have a inclination. We may have seen it somewhere else, or we have something when it's created. We've got to put in the present efforts, A, B, C, D. Even it doesn't need to be rigid as I've done A, I've done B. There can be that spontaneity, that intuition in it. But there's got to...
That's part of, you're saying that's part of like where the good music comes from is in the mystery, basically. And it's allowing, and it's like...
It's in the mystery, or it's in the ingredients. You've got to put all the things, efforts in to get to the stage of that outcome. But if you're focused on the outcome, you impoverish the capacity to put in your efforts towards gaining that outcome. So you've got an idea, you don't know what it is until you get there. But the very fact, if you hook yourself on the result, you don't have any energy left, you sap your energy, you stress yourself out, you don't have any capacity to be liberal, to be thinking, to be creative, to be present in that action and build it up, however it may be.
I see what you're saying.
So you got to put in the efforts into the present. What impoverishes it is your focus of what am I going to get out of it, the result. So you've hooked onto that, you're not letting go of that result. You've got to put in the efforts to the present. Let go and play it. Let it come out. Put in efforts.
I'm just too focused on there being like a certain outcome, and that kind of poisons the initial motivation. So it like, I can't just naturally flourish, but I always keep it in mind, but
that's like actually the concept. That's actually, that what you're saying is actually what you've got to do. You've got to pitch up a goal because you need direction. Everybody needs a direction of where they're heading from. Whether they know exactly what that is or not, you get a sense of that direction. You collect your information of what it is that you want to get to. Then you've got to put in the effort in the present. But you can't focus on that goal then. Otherwise you impoverish and sap all your energy. There's no energy left to create. It's always on the goal. It's got to be. That's good. So it can't be on the crew. That's good. Sam, you had something. It's okay. I'm not sure how I pronounce your name.
It's pronounced Iberg, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Iberg. Thank you. Sam, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to just add something from personal experience about what we were just talking about. I think when I, for example, focus on a certain goal, let's say it's to do with my research studies, even though I may be kind of, getting the work done and actually doing the work and being productive, but the fact that my focus is constantly on the end goal, it stresses me out. And I think that's the negative side to it. So you might still be productive because you're thinking about the goal and achieving, the activities that get you to that goal, but it just reduces the quality of the experience. So you don't actually enjoy, because you're constantly focused on the end goal. You're trying to get it at the expense of losing the process. So you might do the work, but your mind is not actually on doing the work. Your mind is, whether it be your back, is on the end goal. And so it brings you a lot of anxiety and stress and worry. But the minute you push the attention away on the present action, I think the enjoyment enhances. And so because you're not worried about what you're going to get out, whether you're going to achieve it or not, you're just doing the work and putting in the work, and still being confident in knowing that, you know, you're putting in the work, so you're progressing, and yeah, so that's where it works. Yeah, that's how I see it and how I've experienced it.
So the enjoyment, the pleasure, the progress, the certainty is in putting the efforts in the present action. When your mind's focused on the present action, you've pitched up the value of where you want to head, but the certainty is in the present action. It removes the stress.
Certainty.
Is in the present action.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about you're going to get out of it. The minute you do that, you're finished. You're not going to get anything out of it. You're not putting the efforts correctly to get anything out of it. It's impoverished. We're gonna leave it there. Actually, we have Dana, would you like to just read the final paragraph?
Fruit, be it success or failure, is an effect. Parulji, I'm reading it for the second time.
Of course, my eyes flicked into another part. Okay. Let's go. Hurry on till next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hurry on.